Katie, we have all the jurors? Mr. Shellhorn, ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
All right, this is State versus Michael L. Barisone, indictment 19-12-00999-I. May I have appearances of counsel?
May it please the court, Christopher Shellhorn for the state.
Good morning, Your Honor. Alexander Ben on behalf of the state.
And Christopher Dining are also on behalf of Mr. Barisone.
All right, good morning, everyone. Please be seated. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. Record will reflect Mr. Barisone is present, dressed in street attire, including a shirt and tie. All right, if we're ready to proceed, let's call the jurors in, please. Now, who's your witness, Mr. Shellhorn?
Detective Jason Gould.
Okay. And you'll have another witness after that?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective Jason Hensley.
Good morning, everyone. Please be seated. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. We are ready to proceed with the state's case. Mr. Shellhorn, good morning. Please call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Detective Jason Gould.
All right, Detective Jason Gould to the stand. Morning, Detective. Please place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand, listen to the oath as my court clerk administers it, please.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony you give to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Jason Gould, G-O-U-L-D.
Thank you.
Very good. Detective, please have a seat. Keep your voice up nice and loud so all the members of the jury, including those in the gallery, can hear. If you don't understand a question, please indicate that. I'll have counsel rephrase.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Shellhorn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself again to the jury and tell them where you work?
Sure. My name is Jason Gould. I'm a detective at the Morris County Prosecutor's Office.
What is your current rank and assignment?
I'm a detective. I'm assigned to the Specialized Crimes Division.
Have you ever been assigned to any other units with the prosecutor's office?
Yes.
What units?
The Major Crimes Unit and General Investigations Unit.
Do you have any prior law enforcement experience before you joined the prosecutor's office?
Yes, I do. I was a police officer in Randolph, the Randolph Police Department for approximately 11 years.
I want to take your attention to August 7th of 2019. Were you working for the prosecutor's office at that time?
Yes, sir.
What unit were you assigned to at that time?
The Major Crimes Unit.
Can you briefly explain to the jury what the responsibilities generally are of the Major Crimes Unit?
Yes, we respond to or investigate death investigations, homicide, shooting, suspicious death, suicide, drug-induced deaths, fatal motor vehicle crashes, bank robberies, aggravated assaults.
At the time you were assigned to the Major Crimes Unit in August of 2019, what was the typical dress or uniform?
Similar to how I'm dressed today. Suit and tie.
How does the major crimes unit from the prosecutor's office typically become involved in an investigation?
Generally, we are notified by a local municipality and/or the state police through the Morris County Communications Center if they're looking to speak with an on-call detective of the unit.
Now, specifically on August 7th, 2019, at approximately 2:25 that afternoon, do you remember where you were?
Yes, I was in the major crimes squad room at the Morris County Prosecutor's Office.
Who was the supervisor of the unit at the time?
Sergeant Michael Puskas.
At approximately that time on that day, did you become made aware of an incident in Washington Township?
Yes.
Can you very basically describe your understanding of the nature of the incident?
We were advised that there was an active shooter and there was one person who received 2 gunshot wounds.
At some point, were you given an assignment respective to that investigation?
Yes, sir.
What were you assigned to do?
I was asked to respond to the Morristown Medical Center.
Do you know if any other members of the major crimes unit were given different responsibilities?
Yes, they were.
Who made that decision?
Sergeant Michael Puskas.
Are you aware of what other agencies were involved in the investigation?
Yes, the Washington Township Police Department and the Morris County Sheriff's Office.
At some point, did you respond to the Morristown Medical Center?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall approximately what time you arrived there?
I arrived at approximately 3:40 p.m.
When you arrived, where did you go?
To the ICU, intensive care unit.
Were there any other law enforcement officers related to this investigation at the hospital at that time?
Yes, sir. There was Sergeant Burns of the Washington Township Police Department and Detective Kovacs from the Morris County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigations.
And do you recall generally how they were dressed?
They were both in uniform.
Are you aware when you arrived whether any individuals were already at the hospital?
Yes. Upon arrival, I was advised that the victim of the shooting, Lauren Karenick, was in intensive care.
Approximately how long were you at the hospital overall on August 7th, 2019?
Approximately 6 hours.
Now, at some point, did any other individual involved in this incident arrive at the hospital?
Yes.
Who was that?
Michael Barisone.
And do you see Michael Barisone in court today?
Yes, I do.
Could you identify that person by an article of clothing they're wearing?
Yes, he's seated at the table wearing a white shirt, yellow tie, has glasses on, and long gray hair.
I stipulate he's identified my client.
Yes, he has, identifying the defendant, Michael Barisone, for the record.
Are you aware of how the defendant arrived to the hospital?
Yes, he was transported from the scene in an ambulance.
And do you know approximately what time he arrived at the hospital?
He arrived at approximately 3:40 p.m. from what I recall.
Do you recall if there were any law enforcement officers with him?
Yes.
Do you remember who that was?
Yes, there was Patrolman Barnes and Patrolman Hensley of the Washington Township Police Department
Do you recall how they were dressed?
in full uniform.
Do you know where the defendant was taken in the hospital?
He was also taken to ICU.
Was the area where the defendant was taken nearby where Lauren Karenick was?
Yes, it was.
Can you describe that to the jury?
Yes, Mr. Barisone was taken to a room directly next to the room where Mrs. Karenick was,
And where were you posted?
in the hallway,
What was your purpose in being there?
just to get updates on both patients to be able to relay back to my chain of command.
Was the area where the defendant was being treated open or closed?
Closed.
Was it closed with a door or something else?
More or less a curtain.
Were you able to see the defendant in the room at all?
Yes.
Can you describe his appearance for the jury?
Yes, he came in wearing no shirt and a pair of shorts. He had visible injury to his face, to his left arm, left abdomen.
And where was he in the room?
He was in a hospital bed?
Was he restrained or handcuffed at all in the room?
Yes, he was.
Which was it?
He was handcuffed.
Were medical personnel in the room at all?
Yes,
And did you observe generally what they were doing?
yes.
What was that?
Initially, just assessing him for his injuries, and then subsequently treating him for his injuries.
During the time that the defendant was in the room, did you overhear him make any statements?
Yes, I did.
Did you overhear the statements, or do you recall the statements verbatim or generally what the nature of the statements were?
General nature.
Can you tell the jury what the statements that you overheard him making in a general sense were?
Yes, I heard him make two statements. One to the effect of, "They destroyed my life in the last 6 months," followed approximately 1 minute later by, "I had a good life. They took it all away. I'm sorry it happened."
Do you recall how many times, the approximate number of times that he said each statement?
Once.
Did you record those statements in any way?
Yes, I noted them on my field notes.
Did you later add that into your formal police report?
Yes, sir.
How far would you estimate that you were from the defendant at the time you overheard those statements?
Approximately 10 to 15 feet.
Did he make those statements in response to any questioning by you?
No, sir.
Did he make them in response to questioning by other law enforcement officers?
No, sir.
Did he make them in response to any medical personnel?
No, sir.
What was his appearance or demeanor during the time you observed him making those statements?
He was cooperative, was expressing verbally that he was in pain.
Did you have any issues understanding the words or language that he used?
No.
Are you aware during the time that he was being treated by medical personnel of whether they were administering any medications to him?
Prior to the hospital, I can't say that.
But at the time that you were observing him getting treated in the room at the hospital?
Yes, he was given medications for pain.
Do you have any direct knowledge of what was administered?
Yes, just prior to making the initial statement, which I just testified to, he was given a dose of fentanyl.
Do you know that because you saw that, or how do you know?
I observed that and then subsequently asked the hospital staff. And then after, he was also continuing to verbally express that he was still in pain, and he was given subsequent doses of what I was advised was fentanyl and ketamine.
So you don't know that that was what was administered, that's just what you were told?
Yes,
Were you present when the defendant was photographed and processed by CSI detectives?
yes, I was.
You recall approximately what time that was?
It was approximately 9 p.m.
Did the CSI detectives take possession of any items that came to the hospital with the defendant?
Yes,
And did they do that while you were still in the vicinity or the area?
yes.
Do you recall in general what those items were?
Just clothing.
Judge, may I have permission to approach?
Yes.
Judge, for the record, I'm going to show the detective what's been marked as S-193. Detective Gould, I think there are some gloves there if you need them. But if you could just open that bag and look inside and indicate whether or not that appears to be some of the items that were recovered at the time you were at the hospital.
Yes. I can open up this one.
You can open and look, but we just have to wait for the judge to admit it into evidence.
Any objections?
No, Judge.
193 will be admitted into evidence.
Detective, if you could just remove that item and show it to the jury, or tell the jury what it is and show it to the jury.
Part of a waist belt. Another, it's the other part of the belt, and then khaki, I guess torn khaki pants.
And are you aware of whether those were cut in your presence or outside your presence?
Outside. Anything else?
But if you could just ask the jury in the back if they need the detective to hold those up again?
Members of the jury, were you able to see the clothes? I see everyone nodding their head yes.
Thank you, Detective. You could put those back in the bag.
Sure.
Just leave that right there on the floor. Thank you. Detective, you indicated that you were at the hospital for approximately 6 hours.
Yes, sir.
When you left the hospital, where did you go?
I left the Morristown Medical Center and responded to the scene of the incident,
And was that 411 West?
411 West Mill Road in Washington Township, Morris County.
When you got there, did you have any assignment at that location?
Yes, Sergeant Puskas requested that I assist Detective Corporal Mangia Frida of the Morris County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigations to conduct a search of a vehicle at the scene.
Do you recall what type of vehicle that was?
This was a silver in color Dodge Ram pickup, four-door,
Do you recall approximately where that was parked?
near the residence that the victim was residing in.
Judge, no further questions. Thank you.
All right, cross-examination.
Detective, you previously testified in a hearing with regards to this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
And were you given a transcript of that previous hearing prior to your testimony today?
Yes, sir.
And you reviewed that with the prosecutor, correct?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it a fact that in that prior hearing, you testified that the fentanyl was given after the statements, correct?
Initially, yes.
And then, and correct me if I'm wrong, when I brought out your notes, it's clear from your notes that the fentanyl was administered prior to any statements, correct?
A dose of fentanyl was given prior to the initial statement, yes.
And when you say a dose, 100 milligrams of fentanyl was injected into Michael Barisone prior to any statements, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you've been in law enforcement for how many years total?
In January, I began 16, sir.
And would you agree with me that it's important when drafting a official report concerning an incident, that it has to be accurate and contain as much detail as possible?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you got to the hospital, there were already numerous other officers, correct? There.
There was law enforcement there, yes.
And were people talking about this case and what had happened back at Michael Barisone's farm?
Yes, that was something that was spoken about.
Now, Michael Barisone was taken into a room. You've been shown the pants, which have been admitted into evidence. Was he wearing any shirt?
Not that I recall.
Now, those pants that you showed to the jury, are there any holes in the groin area between Michael Barisone's, where Michael Barisone's legs would be?
I would have to inspect them again, sir.
Can you do that?
Yes. There are 2 tears in the pants that I see,
And those-
close to the
those-
groin.
Would those 2 tears be approximately where my hand is on my leg?
Approximately, sir.
And for the record, I'm pointing to the upper groin area. Now, you indicated on direct when you saw Michael Barisone that you observed numerous injuries, correct?
Yes, sir.
For instance, you observed his left arm, correct?
Yes, sir.
And would you describe it as deformed,
Yes, sir.
incapable of holding an item at that point based on your observations, correct?
I couldn't say definitively, sir, but yes, he had an injury to his left arm.
A severe injury based on your observations, correct?
Significant, yes.
Now, he also had injuries to his face, correct?
Yes, sir.
Were both his eyes blackened?
Yes, sir.
Did he have a gash over his right eye?
Yes, sir.
Were both his ears swollen and cut up?
Yes, sir.
Did one look like it was almost cauliflower, swollen, closed?
They did appear to have swelling, yes.
Did you see an injury to his side area?
Yes, like an abrasion.
An abrasion or numerous abrasions
Abrasions.
and bruises?
Abrasion, sir.
Now, when you got there, Michael Barisone was being treated by a number of paramedics, correct?
He was treated during the transport.
Okay, and he was treated by a Kimberly Head and a Daniel Vitale, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you were there, did you hear Michael Barisone at any point in time say that he didn't recall the event that had just taken place?
No, sir. Not specifically.
I'm going to show you what has been marked D10F. And ask you to take a look at this.
I'm aware if
Judge, while the detective's reviewing that, can we be heard at sidebar?
Sure. Objections overruled.
Do you recall Michael Barisone saying that he didn't recall what happened?
I understand that's in my notes, sir, but that wasn't something that I heard him say directly. In speaking with the officers, I believe that's where that note came from, but not from anything I heard him say directly.
How many officers told you that Michael Barisone had injured?
That's hearsay, Mr.
I'm just asking a
Belakis.
number, Judge.
Well, it's still hearsay. The witness said he didn't hear it himself. It came from other people, so.
I'm just
I-
asking how many people
Well,
did he
it's still,
talk to regarding that?
well, did you hear multiple officers? Did you speak to multiple officers about things Mr. Barisone may have said?
I spoke to officers, Judge, about what took place at the scene.
How many
Let's-
officers, just tell me, how many officers did you speak to about what happened at the scene?
From Washington Township, at this point, there were 3 officers there.
Now, you didn't put that in your report, correct?
No, sir.
Now, prior to any statements that you did here, would you agree with me that Michael Barisone was in excruciating pain?
He was expressing the fact that he was experiencing pain, yes, sir.
And what, if anything, did you observe with regards his demeanor, with regards to being in pain?
Aside from the, again, he was verbally expressing that he was looking for something to treat the pain he was experiencing.
When someone touched him or came near his arm, you know, did he make facial expressions? Did he indicate from his expressions or his actions that he was in serious pain?
From his expressions, yes, you could see that he was experiencing pain.
Now, would you agree with me that you took detailed, copious notes, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when I say detailed and copious, you make specific references with regards to exact times when things happened or you observed, correct?
Yes.
You put the exact time he arrived at the hospital, 15:20, correct?
That was my arrival, sir.
Are you reading from his notes or refreshing his memory?
I'm just asking him if he wrote.
It's like, it looked like you were reading his notes, so if you want to refresh his memory, you can do so.
You put in an exact time when Michael Barisone got there, correct?
Yes, sir.
Exact times when other officers from Washington Township arrived, correct?
Yes.
You literally wrote down every detail that you observed, contemporaneous with what you observed, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, how many days did you write your official report after the incident?
My report was drafted the next day, sir.
Well, when's the date of the report?
Are you asking the date on the actual report?
The date on the actual report.
That's the date that my supervisors approve it, not the date that I completed it, sir.
Is there anything on the report that indicates the date that you completed it?
On the report, sir, no.
Anywhere? Is there anything to indicate that you did the report prior to October 23rd,
Again, sir, that
2019?
date on the report is the date it was approved by a supervisor, not the date that I completed it. Or not the date that I typed it, if that's what you're at.
Did you make a rough draft of that report?
Yes, there was a draft of the report before it's approved.
Okay, and where is that rough draft of the report that you made earlier than the date that was approved?
It's typed on that report through our InfoShare system.
And when you say a supervisor had to approve it, did someone from your office go over the report to make sure that it was accurate and correct?
A supervisor has to approve it, yes, sir.
And what are they approving?
I can't testify as to what they're looking at in the report, sir.
What's the purpose of a supervisor, to your knowledge, reviewing a report before it's submitted?
To review what is contained within the report.
And has the supervisor ever told you to take something out or include something prior to it being submitted as an official report?
It depends, sir.
It has happened though, correct?
Where something is amended in the report?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, Michael Barisone, and correct me if I'm wrong, at 1356 made the first statement that you testified to, correct?
That's not correct, sir. It's a clerical error.
Now, when you say clerical error, whose clerical error is it?
It's my report, sir.
Did your supervisor pick up that clerical error and talk to you about it?
I can't testify as to what they did or didn't do, sir.
What time did Michael Barisone make the statement that you just talked to?
That
"It
would be,
destroyed my life in the last 6 months"?
that would have been at 15:56 hours. So 3:56 p.m.
So your report is inaccurate, correct?
That time should be 15:56, sir.
And when did you realize that there was a clerical error in your report?
After it was approved, sir.
And at any point in time, did you seek to address that issue? And change the report to reflect the accurate time?
No, sir.
Is there anything else in that report that's inaccurate?
No, sir.
Now, before the first statement, you've testified that Michael Barisone received fentanyl, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he also received fentanyl and ketamine after that statement, correct?
Yes, sir.
And soon after that, isn't it a fact that he
Soon,
actually...
soon after what? You mentioned two things, fentanyl and then fentanyl and ketamine, so specify what you're talking about, please.
Okay. Soon after the second injections of fentanyl and ketamine, he basically passed out, correct?
Yes, he became, it appeared like in a state of sleep.
Now, when you first saw Michael Barisone, was he incoherent?
I wouldn't describe it as that, no, sir.
Now, you testified to a second statement, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you testified, and correct me if I'm wrong, that at some point in time, Michael Barisone said he was sorry, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you put that in the official report, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, can you tell me whether or not anywhere in the notes that you took on the day in question, contemporaneous with what was going on, did you include in your notes anywhere that he said, "I'm sorry"?
After that note of that statement, no, sir.
I'm referring to the notes that you took at the time of the incident, correct?
Yes, in my notes, after that, no, it's not in my notes.
When you say after that, I want to make sure I'm clear on this point. In your official notes, isn't it a fact that nowhere is there any reference to Michael Barisone saying the words, "I'm sorry"?
In my notes, no, it is not, sir.
But the other two specific statements, word for word, are included, correct?
Yes, in my notes, sir.
And in your official report, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you indicated you were standing outside of the area where Michael Barisone was being treated. You don't recall the exact words of what he said, correct? Correct?
No, the statements were made in effect. They weren't made directly to me, sir.
Was he talking to anyone, or was he just talking to himself?
He was speaking out loud, sir.
Was he talking to anyone based on your observations?
At which point, sir?
At any point with respect to him making any statements?
The statements,
The statements that you've testified to, was he talking to anyone?
Hold on a second. Just for clarification, maybe a little confusion.
Okay.
Whether this witness may not know whether he was speaking directly to someone when he was uttering those statements. Perhaps the better question is, was there anyone present around his bedside? Was he being treated at that time when he spoke? Just so we avoid confusion.
Where was Michael Barisone when he made the first statement about these people destroying his life?
they were all made while he was in his hospital bed.
And were people around him?
Yes, there are medical personnel there, sir.
Were they asking him questions, or was he just making these statements without any questions?
They weren't prompted by any specific question by anyone, sir.
I can just have a moment, Judge.
Certainly.
I'm going to show you a number of photographs, please. D 800-52 to D 800-75. And ask you just to review these.
Mr. Valinkas, would you still like these pants out, or
Oh,
should I
no,
put those back?
I'm done with
Wait,
them, please.
you can put them away.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to ask you to take a look at these photographs, just up here. Don't let anyone else see them. Maybe put them face down when you're done.
Okay. Would you like me to go through them?
Yeah, please.
sequentially?
Please. The paper clips are just copies.
There's copies, okay.
Get a chance to take a look at those?
Yes, sir.
Are they consistent with your observations of the injuries that Michael Barisone suffered on that day?
Yes, sir.
Now, you testified that one statement in your notes that you didn't include in your report was something someone else told you, correct?
Which statement specifically, sir?
The statement with regards to "I don't recall."
Yes, sir.
In your 3 pages of notes, or 4 pages of notes, is there any other reference to anything that anyone else told you during your time at the hospital?
I'd have to review them, sir.
Can you?
I mean, on the first page, scuffle.
Don't read
Sorry.
it out loud.
Okay.
If it's from someone else, what
Yes.
someone else told you, it's hearsay. Right, but there is some reference about something that someone else told you. Just answer yes or no.
Yes, sir.
All right. What's the next question?
I'm done, Judge. You take these photographs back. I have nothing further to.
All right, any redirect?
Judge, could I have a breakout room to show the detective his report?
Sure.
Not to publish it, just to
Right.
show it to him based on
Yes.
questions that were asked. Judge, while that's pulling up for the record, this is S-149 for identification.
Okay.
Detective Gould, while that's pulling up, you were asked some questions about times that were in your notes in your reports.
Yes, sir.
And I think you testified on direct examination about the approximate time that you arrived to Morristown Medical Center.
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to direct you to what should be coming up in front of you as S-149. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that a copy of the report that you were discussing earlier on cross-examination?
Yes, sir.
And if we look on page 1, in the narrative section, does that indicate approximately what time you arrived at Morristown Medical Center?
Yes, sir.
What time is that?
Approximately 15-20 hours.
And for those of the jury who are not familiar with 24-hour time, what time is 15:20 in 12-hour time?
3:20 p.m.
Now, scrolling down to page 2 of that report, you were asked questions about the times that you overheard the defendant make certain statements?
Yes, sir.
And does it indicate on that page approximately halfway down when you observed or overheard him make those statements?
Yes, sir.
What is the first time that's typed there in your report?
It's typed 13:56 hours,
Which would be approximately, or which would be what time in 12-hour time?
1:56 PM,
What time was the second statement typed in?
15:57 hours,
Which is what time?
3:57.
So is it fair to say that you did not hear the defendant make a statement at 1:56 that afternoon before you arrived to the hospital?
That's correct, sir.
And that's what you're indicating was a clerical error or
Yes, sir.
mistake in your record? No further questions, Judge.
No redirect.
You may step down, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shellhorn?
Yes, Your Honor, the state will call Officer Jason Hensley.
All right, Officer Jason Hensley, please. Yeah. Hold on one sec. Ms. Rattler, is the person from IT here?
Yes, he's on his way.
All right. I'm just having some computer issues. I need IT to take a look at it. All right, let's swear in the witness while we wait. Left hand on the Bible. Thank you. Raise your right hand.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony you give to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Jason Hensley, Hensley.
Thank you.
Have a seat. Go ahead. We'll begin, and then when IT gets here, we'll just take a quick, hopefully 5-minute break.
Thank you,
All
Judge.
right, go ahead.
Officer Hensley, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and tell them where you work?
Officer Jason Hensley, I work with the Washington Township Police Department.
And approximately how long have you worked for the Washington Township Police Department?
Approximately 4.5 years.
What's your current rank and assignment?
Patrol and patrol officer.
Do you have any prior law enforcement experience before joining the Washington Township Police Department?
I worked for 2 years in Mendham Township Police Department.
I'm going to direct your attention to August 7th, 2019. Were you working for the Washington Township Police Department at that time?
Yes.
What were you doing on the afternoon of August 7th, 2019?
I was working a third-party detail.
Can you explain to the jury generally what that means?
Construction companies and outside contractors hire us to do traffic control in their work zones when they're working in town.
Do you recall what the nature of the third-party assignment was on that date?
Yes, we're working with a tree trimming company.
Do you recall the approximate area where that was happening?
West Mill Road.
How were you dressed on that day?
I was wearing our Class C uniform.
And what uniform are you wearing today in court?
This is a Class B uniform.
What would be the difference between a Class B uniform and a Class C uniform?
There's nothing different except the badge and nameplate are embroidered. There's a patch on each arm, and that day in question, I was wearing a short sleeve version of that uniform.
Directing your attention to...
Mr. Shellhorn, just hold on for 1 second. Go ahead, Mr. Shellhorn.
Your Honor, is this supposed to be here?
No, Mr. Blinkus, can you take that back, please? Thank you, officer.
Cool.
Officer Hensley, I apologize if I already asked you this question, but I just want to make sure that the record is clear. Do you recall where you were working that, or the general area where you were working that third-party detail at approximately 2:15 the afternoon of August 7th, 2019?
At that point, we were on a lunch break and we were right outside our town line in an industrial area. And we were in a parking lot at that point.
Were there any other Washington Township police officers there with you?
Yes,
Who was that?
Detective Heimer.
And I'm just gonna ask you to keep your voice up a little bit if you can. That microphone doesn't actually amplify.
Okay.
It just records.
Sorry.
So just to make sure that the jury in the back behind you can hear you.
Yes.
Do you recall how Detective Heimer was dressed?
He was dressed in the same fashion I was, wearing a Class C uniform.
At that time, approximately 2:15 that afternoon, do you recall receiving a dispatch over your radio?
Yes,
Do you recall the address where that dispatch was for?
yes.
What was the address?
411 West Mill Road.
What was the general nature of the dispatch?
Active shooter.
What did you do after receiving that dispatch?
I confirmed that with Detective Heimer, what the nature of the call was, and he had a ballistic vest with him at that point, so he began to respond.
What did you do?
I looked in my trunk and found a ballistic vest, and I responded as well.
Had you ever been to the property of 411 West Mill Road before?
Yes,
Can you describe for the jury in a general sense the layout of the property?
there's a farmhouse several hundred feet off of West Mill Road, on the left side of the driveway going in, and as you proceed back into the rear of the property, there's an equestrian facility.
Are you able to see the equestrian facility from the road?
Maybe the roof, if I recall correctly.
When you proceeded to 411 West Mill Road in response to that dispatch, at some point did you pull into the driveway?
Yes,
Were there any other police officers already on scene?
Detective Heimer and Officer Wartenberg.
Do you recall if you saw where their vehicles were parked?
They were parked in the driveway, the portion of the driveway that goes all the way back to the horse farm.
Where were they parked in relation to the area of the farmhouse?
Right next to it, if you're driving in, it'd be to the right of the farmhouse.
Upon pulling into the driveway and seeing their cars there, could you see them?
No,
What did you do when you saw their cars there?
I put my car in park and got out and immediately heard commotion coming from the rear of the residence.
Where did you go?
That's why I went to the rear of the residence.
What did you first see when you arrived in the area of the back of the residence?
I saw Officer Wartenberg and Detective Heimer and 3 unidentified parties.
Do you recall the position of the unidentified parties?
Officer Heimer was standing over one. There was a gravel pile in that area, and Officer Wartenberg was with another, and there was a female that was laying next to the stairs where Officer Heimer was, standing over top of the male subject.
During the course of the investigation as it evolved, did you come to learn who the identities of those people were?
Yes,
Did you learn who the female was?
yes,
Who is that?
Lauren Canara.
Did you come to learn the identity of the person that Detective Heimer was standing by?
Yes,
Who was that?
Michael Barisone.
Do you see Michael Barisone in court today?
Yes,
Can you identify him by an article of clothing that he's wearing?
he's wearing a white shirt, yellow tie, seated at the counsel's table.
Identifying the defendant for the record.
And you indicated that Officer Wartenberg was with another male?
Yes,
Did you come to learn who that male was?
yes,
Who is that?
Robert Goodwin.
Where did you go first when you saw this?
To Officer Heimer's position.
And what did you do when you got there?
I began assessing the victim, or the patient, who was on the ground at the time.
What were your initial observations of Ms. Kennery?
She was pale, and had a little bit of blood on her clothes.
Judge, may I have permission to display S-389 to the jury? It is already in evidence.
Yes. All right, S-389 is being displayed on the screens, the monitors to the members of the jury. Go ahead, Mr. Shellhorn.
Officer Hensley, can you please tell the jury the approximate area where you parked your patrol car when you got into the property?
Right in the area that says driveway, on the diagram, right in that general area.
And when you proceeded to the area of the rear of the farmhouse, can you describe the area where you saw Officer Wurtenberg and Mr. Goodwin, approximately?
Between the rear steps and the part that's labeled gravel pile.
Do you see the area where you saw Detective Heimer and the defendant?
Yes.
Can you describe for the jury the approximate area where you observed the two of them?
It says back door in the bottom right corner of the portion that says house. They were right off the stairs there.
And where did you observe Ms. Canarack?
If you're looking at it from right there, it'd be to the left of the rear stairs, between the bush and the rear stairs.
Now, you indicated that you first went over to the area where Detective Heimer and the defendant were, and Ms. Canarack?
Yes.
And you indicated that you made some observations of Ms. Canarack.
Yes.
What did you do at that point?
I began to remove her clothes to see where the wounds were and what the nature of them were.
Did you identify an approximate area on her body where there were wounds?
The upper left portion of her chest.
Did you see how many there were?
It appeared that there were 2 bullet wounds.
And could you describe what you saw as you removed some of the clothing that was in the way and you saw those wounds in that area?
There was a little bit of blood and what looked like 2 puncture or bullet wounds.
What did you do next?
I began to try and hold pressure on the 2 wounds. There was a lot going on there, but from what I had, that's the only thing I could medically do at that point.
At some point, did other officers arrive to the scene?
Yes, several Washington Township officers arrived.
Did they bring anything with them?
They brought various medical gear.
What did they do when they got on scene?
I gave over patient care to them because I wasn't a certified EMT at that point, so they had better knowledge of what Ms. Canarack needed medically versus me.
After turning over care for Ms. Canarack to the other officers, what did you do next?
I took custody of Mr. Barisone.
At the time you took custody of him, was he restrained or handcuffed in any way?
He was handcuffed.
Were there any other officers with you when you took custody of him?
No.
When you took custody of him, did you tell him anything?
I advised him of his Miranda rights at some point during my interaction with him, yes.
Can you explain to the members of the jury what Miranda rights are?
Miranda rights are given to anybody who's in custody or who may or may not be subject to an investigation.
Why did you give him or advise him of his Miranda rights at that time?
Due to the nature of the call, we're still sorting stuff out.
How did you advise him of those rights?
I carry a card on me every time I'm working, and I read them verbatim off a card so that they're systematic and the same every time.
Do you recall, and I can refer you back to S-389, do you recall the approximate area where you were when you advised the defendant of those rights?
Somewhere between the rear steps until he was seated against an enclosed trailer, which is depicted in this diagram.
Can you describe the general area where that is?
There's a vehicle that's marked FL REQ 1F7QUE. It's in some point in the gravel area directly in front of that.
After you advised him of those rights, did he acknowledge them in any way?
Yes, he verbally acknowledged that he understood the rights.
And do you recall specifically what he said in acknowledging what you had just told him?
No, I don't recall. I know it was a verbal acknowledgement.
Did you ask him any questions after administering those rights to him?
Yes, just medical questions, trying to ascertain if he had any further injuries that I couldn't see.
Were you able to observe if he did have any injuries?
It appeared he had a laceration on his head. His head and face were covered in blood.
Now, you indicated that after, at some point after you took custody of Mr. Barisone in the area of the back door of the residence, that you were with him as he made his way across the driveway there.
Yes.
Can you describe to the jury where he went first?
I took him away from the immediate area so other members of the department can render aid to Mrs. Canarak, and which was directly in front of that truck I described before, which is about in the center of that gravel parking lot behind the rear door.
When you were in that area, do you recall, was he standing or sitting or something else?
I believe he was kneeling at one point. I know that I did search him when he was standing though.
How did you search him?
So anytime we search, we're taught in the academy, I mean, it's standardized and systematic. You're searching for any weapons or any contraband, and that's what I did when I searched Mr. Barisone.
Did you pat down or touch parts of his body?
Yes, yeah, it was just a routine pat down, looking for anything.
Did you find anything in any of his pockets?
Yes, in his right front pocket of his pants, there was a handgun magazine.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Officer Hensley, I'm going to show you what's been entered into evidence already as S-178. Can you look at that and determine what that is? And there are actually gloves right on the floor next to you. I'm sorry.
Yes,
What is that?
that's the handgun magazine I pulled from Mr. Barisone's right front pants pocket.
When you pulled it out of his pocket, were you able to tell whether there were bullets in the magazine?
Yes,
Did you take the bullets out at that time?
no.
What did you do with the magazine?
I gave the magazine to Sergeant Bigham, who was also there, helping me pat down Mr. Barisone at that time.
And did you see what he did with the magazine?
Sergeant Bigham secured the magazine in the rear of, if I recall correctly, the trunk of Corporal Fellini's patrol vehicle.
And approximately how far away was that vehicle from where you were with Mr. Barisone?
Approximately 15 to 20 feet.
After locating that in Mr. Barisone's pocket and turning it over to Sergeant Bigham I'm sorry, I forgot what rank Bigham is.
Sergeant Bigham.
Sergeant, and turning that over to Sergeant Bigham, did you take the defendant, Michael Barisone, anywhere else on the property?
Yes, he was moved from that specific area to the side of an enclosed trailer, which is on the edge of the gravel lot, approximately 20 feet from my location.
Did you see while he was in that area if he was treated or examined by any EMS personnel?
He was.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as S-250 and entered into evidence already. What is S-250 a picture of?
That's Mr. Barisone's clothing and shoes.
And is that in the approximate area you were just describing to the jury where you saw him receiving medical treatment?
Yes.
Were you given any assignments with respect to Mr. Barisone and his transport off the property?
Yes.
What were you instructed to do?
I was to accompany Mr.
Objection. What was the instructed? It's hearsay.
All right,
Judge, I don't think it's hearsay, it's really just.
It's really an
to explain why
instruction,
he
like a question.
Did what he did.
Right.
But I can,
Overruled.
I was instructed to accompany Mr. Barisone to Morristown Medical Center.
did you do that?
Yes.
How did he get to the Morristown Medical Center?
I'm not sure if it was a Long Valley First Aid Squad ambulance or an Atlantic ambulance, but it wasn't. He was in the back of an ambulance.
Were there EMTs or other medical personnel in the ambulance?
Yes.
What were they doing during the course of the transport from Long Valley to Morristown?
Assessing and treating Mr. Barisone.
Do you recall approximately how long that transport took?
Approximately 30 minutes.
Was Mr. Barisone, the defendant, restrained or handcuffed while he was in the back of the ambulance?
Yes.
Do you recall specifically any of the medical conversations or the conversations that he was having with the medical personnel?
They were just speaking medically to him in the sense of asking him to try and ascertain what was wrong with him, and they were treating him medically.
Did you ask him any questions?
No,
During the course of time that the defendant was in the back of the ambulance being transported to Morristown, did he make any statements that you do recall?
yes,
Were those statements made in response to any specific questions from the medical personnel?
no.
Can you tell the jury what you recall overhearing the defendant say?
Is this real? And I need to wake up.
Do you recall the approximate number of times that he made each of those statements?
Undetermined, but it was multiple, several times.
Did you hear him say those words verbatim, or is that a summary or just your recollection of what he said?
If I recall my report correctly, that were direct statements. They were his quotes.
Were those statements recorded?
No,
Were they required to be recorded?
no.
What was the defendant's appearance or demeanor during the time that you were observing him in the ambulance?
Appeared robotic. Other than in the ambulance, I was seated behind him, so I wasn't able to see his appearance.
Meaning see his face?
No, I saw the back of his head.
Did you have any issues understanding the words he was using or the language he was using?
No,
Do you recall when you arrived at Morristown Medical Center?
yes.
What happened when you arrived there?
Mr. Barisone was taken out of the ambulance and brought inside the hospital and brought to a trauma room.
Do you recall if there were any other members of law enforcement at the hospital already?
Officer Barnes followed me. That I recall, he was the only officer that I directly remember seeing when I got out of the ambulance.
When you went inside, did you see other members of law enforcement?
Officer Barnes, and at some point, Detective Gould was there from the prosecutor's office.
What was your role at the hospital once you arrived there?
I was to maintain contact with Mr. Barisone visually in a security function.
Where were you while you were doing that?
I was outside the trauma room that Mr. Barisone was in.
Do you have any recollection of the treatment that he received while he was there?
No.
No further questions for Officer Hensley at this time. Thank you, Judge.
Very well. Counsel, cross-examination, please.
Morning, officer.
Good morning.
Now, you were with Hamer when you got the call to respond,
Detective Heimer, yes.
and he left and you immediately followed thereafter, correct?
Negative.
How long after did you arrive from Hamer?
Approximately 1 minute after Detective Heimer.
All right, so Detective Heimer gets there, you arrive approximately a minute after, correct?
Approximately, yes.
And you immediately have an opportunity to observe Michael Barisone, correct?
Immediately in what sense, sir?
You were right there with Cataract and Barisone.
Yes, when I went to Officer Heimer's position, yes, I immediately observed him.
Okay, and would you describe Michael Barisone at that point as partially conscious?
Yes,
Would you describe him as incoherent?
I didn't have too much interaction with him, so
Well, when you say you didn't have interaction with him, you Mirandized him, correct?
at that point, yes, yes, I did.
And was he incoherent at that point?
No,
Now, you said you used your card that you always use, correct?
yes,
And again, that's, I assume, so you don't leave anything out, you ask the questions verbatim, each and every time, correct?
yes,
And it's your testimony that on day you asked all the questions on your card, correct?
yes.
And what was Michael Barisone's response to each and every question?
At the end, He verbally acknowledged that I read him his Miranda warnings.
What do you mean he verbally acknowledged?
I don't recall if he said yes or I understand or something of that nature, but he verbally acknowledged that he understood what I just told him.
And what did he say when you said, having these rights in mind, you wish to talk to us now?
I don't recall.
You asked him that question, correct?
Yes,
And you have no recollection of what he said in response to that specific question that was on your card?
it was a summary. I read everything. And then I asked him if he understood.
And then you asked him, having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk to us now, correct?
I don't recall what his answer was to that. At that point, I wasn't going to ask him anything investigative.
Now, when you got there, was Michael Barisone handcuffed?
Yes,
Was he handcuffed behind
No.
his back?
correction. He was not handcuffed. He was handcuffed while I was there.
Was he handcuffed behind his back?
Yes,
Did he make any indication to you when his left arm was put behind his back and handcuffed that he was in pain?
I did not handcuff him, so to me, no.
Well, while you were there interacting with him, his hands were cuffed behind his back, correct?
Yes,
And at any point in time, when his hands and both arms were cuffed behind his back, did he indicate to you that he was in pain?
not that I recall.
Did you notice anything or observe him which would indicate to you that he was in pain?
No,
Like wincing or making expressions when he was moved one way or another?
no,
Now, you rode with him in the hospital, you rode with him in the ambulance to the hospital, correct?
yes,
And did you see any medical personnel inject anything into his body?
I did not observe that, no.
Did Michael Barisone at any point in time complain that he was in pain?
Not that I'm aware of.
Was he still handcuffed behind his back?
If I recall correctly, yes.
Based on your observations, before he was put in the ambulance, you made an observation, and correct me if I'm wrong, that his left arm could well have been fractured, correct?
I don't recall that.
I'm going to show you 10I, which is a copy of your police report. And if I can quicken things up here, I'm going to refer you to a sentence in the fourth paragraph of your official police report.
Yes, I remember that he, several lacerations and a possible fractured left arm.
And you were aware of that before it was placed in the ambulance, correct?
It appears so.
And did anyone try to accommodate that fracture when they secured him in the ambulance, to your knowledge?
Not that I'm aware.
When was your official report done?
I don't know if there's an author date. If this is accurate, then it was on August 11th.
When was it
But you're no-
approved by supervisor?
It says, yes, report date, August 11th.
Now, what does report date mean?
If I could recall, that it's when I authored the report.
Not when a supervisor approves your report, correct?
I'm unaware of that. I've never approved the report.
But this date on your report that says report date indicates to you that that's when you wrote and submitted it, correct?
It appears that way, yes.
Now, during the transport to the hospital, it's your testimony that Michael Barisone repeatedly said, "Is this real?" Is that correct?
Yes,
And he said it how many times?
multiple times. I can't put a number on it.
Right, so as he's going to the hospital, he continually says multiple times, "Is this real? Is this real?"
He said it in conjunction with the other statement that had in quotes there.
Okay? The other statement, "I need to wake up. I need to wake up." How many times did he say that?
He's-
Same amount of times as the first statement?
They were one and the same, that he was just saying them one after the other, in the same phrase.
Now, you had indicated on direct that you were familiar of this location, correct?
Yes,
You had responded on August 1st to an incident, correct?
yes,
And will you agree with me that Michael Barisone looked much different on the 7th than he did on the 1st, correct?
in what context, sir?
His demeanor?
I don't really have a clear picture of his demeanor right now.
And finally, the term that you used to describe him was robotic, correct?
Yes,
Nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, thank you, Judge.
All right, you may step down. Thank you. Mr. Shellhorn?
Judge, I believe I have one more witness, but I'm not sure that he's here yet. So I know it's a little bit early for our morning break, but
All right, we'll take our morning break early. We'll take 20 minutes. Who's your next witness?
Edward David.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning break for 20 minutes. Thank you.
On the record, off.
On the record. Just wait for the door to close, please. All right, be seated.
Judge, the detective just advised me he is en route, I think,
Okay.
is here somewhere. We're just trying to get him to the courtroom.
All right. How long do you?